Leanne Watson died in the Bloomington Hospital ER 3 years ago. Now her husband drives around Bloomington with a billboard mounted on the back of his truck. He says the sign and the rally are both meant to raise awareness because the hospital refuses to address his concerns.
I may be considered a little bit of a eccentric or oddball because I have a sign in the back of my truck stating that my wife died begging for air in the Bloomington Hospital. But you work with what you have to work with.
According to her medical records, Leanne Watson suffered from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, as well as asthma. The ER records show Leanne arrived via ambulance with her chief complaint being she was unable to breathe. Jeff says the doctor incorrectly diagnosed anxiety and directed the administration of the drug Ativan. Leanne passed away only moments after the shot was administered.
But you have to be careful with Ativan. You have to be careful giving it to somebody who has compromised respiratory function. You have to be careful giving it to somebody who's on drugs that suppress the central nervous system. They knew she was on drugs that suppress the central nervous system. They knew she was on drugs for someone with a compromised respiratory function, but they gave it to her anyway.
Following Leanne's death, the hospital ordered 2 separate autopsies and 2 different conclusions were drawn. Neither report, however, lists Ativan as the cause of death. Watson went on to settle with the Bloomington Hospital and says he now regrets it. He says he knew very little about Indiana malpractice laws when he settled, and that many details about his wife's treatment have come to light since he took the money.
There are plenty of things you can do to get your pound of flesh. There are plenty of things you can do to try to get some vindication. Most of them aren't legal. The only legal remedy you have in the state of Indiana for a medical malpractice case is to sue the healthcare provider and get a judgment.
In Indiana, the most a malpractice defendant can be liable for is $250,000, which in some cases can then be supplemented by a panel that can award up to $1 million from what's called the Patient's Compensation Fund, which is essentially a reinsurance fund that healthcare providers pay into for occasions such as this. Fred Schultz, a medical malpractice plaintiff lawyer with Green and Schultz in Bloomington, says Indiana's malpractice laws harm legitimate claims.
No matter how much the medical expenses are, no matter what the lost wages are, no matter how what the loss is to the family, and no matter whether a jury awards $10 million or $50 million, the verdict is reduced to the statutory limit of $1.25 million. So,
lawyers who represent plaintiffs stand to gain from larger payouts and typically do not support tort reform or medical malpractice award caps because they say that they hinder sufficient compensation, while lawyers who represent defendants such as the Bloomington Hospital say that tort reform and those award caps help to weed out frivolous lawsuits. In other states, plaintiffs can receive millions depending on the degree of malpractice, the earning potential over the course of a lifetime, as well as projected medical care costs, among other things. Jeremy Diltz, a lawyer who represents defendants with the Carson Boxberger law firm here in Bloomington, says that tort reform helps to ward off those frivolous lawsuits.
As I tell my clients who are first-time defendants, if you choose to become a doctor or a healthcare provider, the issue isn't if you will ever be sued. The issue is when and how often.
Diltz also says Indiana's malpractice laws are helping to limit the number of frivolous lawsuits.
Screening out and putting in place a screening process for even non-frivolous but just not very good or non-meritorious claims before it ever sees the light of a courtroom, I think is a good idea.
IU Health Bloomington Hospital officials declined an interview, but did release a statement about the Watson case. The statement reads, Indiana University Health Bloomington holds our patients' safety as our #1 priority and takes any matters of quality or safety very seriously. We regret any time a family suffers the loss of a loved one. We have actively responded to the concerns and questions raised by Mrs. Watson's family and believe we have resolved any issues of concern with the family. Although the hospital says it considers the issue resolved, Jeff Watson is still looking for answers. He has submitted a list of questions regarding his wife's death, but says his correspondence dating back several years has gone unanswered.
I want some justice. I want some answers. I want some answers. They owe it to her.
Watson hopes the rally will pressure the hospital to answer his questions. For WTIU News, I'm Jason Gabrick.